Good morning, everyone. I am Maria Gonzalez with SBP, and we're excited to have you join us today. To help things run smoothly, please keep your microphones muted during the presentation. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. We'll get to them at the end of the session. Just a quick note, today's webinar is being recorded. We'll be sending out the presentation slides afterward, so please keep an eye on your inbox and your spam folder just in case. The recording will also be posted on our YouTube channel in the coming days, so stay tuned for that as well. SBP is a nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating disaster recovery and building community resilience. In partnership with the Walmart Foundation, we're hosting webinars designed to equip disaster recovery leaders with the knowledge and tools needed to reduce unnecessary suffering and improve long-term recovery outcomes. SBP has 5 innovations: building efficiently, sharing our model with other organizations, preparing home and business owners through resilience training, advising municipal and state officials, and advocating for policy changes and improvements to the disaster recovery industry. We believe in a holistic approach to disasters, increasing resilience before and streamlining recovery after. SBP, in partnership with the Walmart Foundation, is excited to announce that our last 2025 webinar is coming up. Our next webinar is July 23rd, and Joshua Bryant will speak on the Stafford Act and FEMA's disaster declaration process. The registration link or QR code will be on the slides we sent out later today. We are also excited to tell you about 2 upcoming courses in the heart of Savannah, Georgia. We have our disaster housing course on July 15th through the 16th. This 2-day course covers critical elements of the pre-construction, construction, and post-construction phases involved in effectively repairing or replacing disaster-damaged homes. To register for this course, simply use the link on the slide or QR code. This course is sold on a per seat basis. The prices are listed at the bottom of this slide. Our second course is our Disaster Recovery Leader Practitioner course on September 16th through the 18th. SBP's 2.5-day course equips partners with technical knowledge of the CDBG-DR program, practical management skills, and proven strategies to build more effective recovery organizations. The course emphasizes smart business and financial decision-making to improve program performance from start to finish. To register for this course, simply use the link on the slide or QR code. This course is available as a one-time scholarship, thanks to the fantastic support from the Walmart Foundation. They're all about helping people and communities through learning, and we're so grateful for their incredible contribution. Because of them, we can offer this awesome opportunity. Please don't hesitate to contact me with any questions regarding these courses. Take a moment to visit SBP's Resource Hub to explore detailed information about our trainings and webinars. You'll find a range of innovative trainings, webinars, and other offerings that may interest you. If you'd like to learn more or get involved, simply click the Contact Us button. Stay connected with the advice team on social media. Follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook for the latest updates. Now I will pass it over to our disaster advisor, Sherry Risk. Sherry, you're muted, Sherry.
Oh, sorry. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Disaster Policy Procedures and Agreements webinar. My name is Sherry Risk, and I am an SVP Disaster Advisor. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. So we're going to be talking about disaster policy procedures today, and we're going to talk about it within the context of FEMA and housing and urban development. So FEMA's mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters. Whatever the disaster is, they are the response, they are the team responders immediately after the incident. Also, we're going to be talking about housing and urban development, which administers the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program. And we see HUD come in to rebuild disaster impact areas, and they are the seed money to start the long-term recovery process. Next slide, please. In the United States, the overall disaster framework is two layers. There's the National Disaster Recovery Framework, and there's the National Response Framework. You can see, again, everyone is doing preparedness. This is something that everyone has top of mind. This could be pre-planning, developing your hazard mitigation plan, having preparedness or tabletop exercise, and most certainly developing partnerships, which are key within the preparedness, the response, and the recovery. Immediately after the disaster, the short-term recovery is really when FEMA, SBA, and the National Flood Insurance Program comes into play, along with a multitude of nonprofit agencies, private donations, and such. So this near term of short term is where you really see a lot of activity with FEMA and the things that we're going to be talking about today, as well as the intermediary phase, which some intermediary recovery going on with debris, infrastructure repairs, housing, things like that. Then where you see the long-term come into play is where housing and urban development comes into play. So FEMA has the Disaster Recovery Fund, which is allocated funds every year by Congress, whereas housing and urban development, the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funding is an appropriation. It's not budgeted annually, and it comes into play when a disaster reaches a certain level. Then Congress will appropriate and allocate Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery funds. We just saw this allocation this year in January for a multitude of disasters, from the Maui wildfires to the most recent Hurricane Helene, Debbie, and Milton, as well as other disasters that have occurred during this time period. Next slide, please. So today we're going to briefly introduce FEMA and the pre-disaster policies and agreements. These include emergency pay policies, emergency procurement policies, pre-procured contracts, the documentation which is necessary in order to submit reimbursement requests to FEMA, and then mutual aid agreements. Next slide, please. So FEMA, there is the individual assistance, which goes to individuals who in assistance for losing their home, being displaced, having their home damaged or destroyed by hurricane. The other primary program immediately after the disaster is the FEMA Public Assistance Program. And this is a grant which FEMA gives for emergency and permanent work, with the purpose of allowing communities to respond and recover from disasters and emergencies. And keep in mind, these are declarations, only presidential declarations. So a lot of times there may be more minor disasters, but this program is applicable to presidentially declared disasters. Next slide, please. The overview of FEMA Public Assistance. What is this program? Supplemental grants to eligible applicants. So it allows communities to respond or recover from the presidentially declared major disasters or emergency. And the purpose is to help cover costs that are incurred for things like debris removal, any life-saving emergency protective measures, any emergency service personnel, and also restoring public infrastructure. And keep in mind when accessing the public assistance, when FEMA awards the money, there is a federal cost share, and the federal cost share is 75% of the eligible costs. So for every 75 cents, the local jurisdiction.
Oh, cool.
I think we have someone needs to mute, please. Next slide, please. So eligibility for public assistance. There are two definitions which are critically important for being eligible. The work has to be an emergency or it has to be permanent. You have to be able to document it as a result of the declared incident. It has to be within the local designated disaster area, and it has to be the legal responsibility of the applicant. So it has to be presidentially declared, a permanent work, and it has to be when the incident is declared presidentially, there will be an area. So it could be a county, it could be multiple counties, it could be a state. It just depends. As you all know, disasters don't know geographical bounds. So the work has to be within the designated area. So when the presidential declaration happens and the FEMA money is available to apply for, make sure that you check what the geographic location is. So when you're doing the work, it is occurring within that area. And also make sure that if it is something that you are legally responsible for and not another entity. So those are two important things to really keep in mind. The cost, what the cost of the work is going to have to be tied to the eligible work. And keep in mind, you need to document. You need to have authorization and approval. And then we'll talk about it a bit later, but it has to be necessary and reasonable. You have to document not only that you did the work and the hours and such, but the cost is based on an estimate that is verified, and you can't randomly just ask for a certain dollar amount, but you have to have it documented, or like in the case of repairs, you would have to have an engineering estimate, or you would have to have an architectural estimate. Things like that makes substantiating the necessary and reasonable piece of this critically important. Now, the costs are wide ranging between labor, equipment, materials, contract work. If you need to hire contractors, you can also charge direct cost, which is the actual cost itself. Think about direct cost in terms of tying it to a specific address, versus indirect costs, which might be support services that are supporting multiple projects, multiple work efforts, things like that. They're supporting the efforts across multiple addresses and such. So you are allowed to submit for indirect admin cost as well. Next slide, please. So documentation, document. This is vitally important to document as you submit for the application for public assistance. FEMA will review it. They will determine the work as defined by the previous discussion I had, and the cost eligibility. And the cost can be based on completed work or estimated work to be done, but it has to be accurate, it has to be complete, and you have to validate the claimed cost. So a best practice to do this is you want to keep all your contracts, all the invoices tied to the contract, timesheets, or if you have an automated timekeeping system, the records from that system, and any labor records. You want to make sure that you have logs for all the equipment. A good practice is to inventory your equipment, so you know what equipment is where, because you obviously have planned and you may deploy the equipment. You want to make sure you have usage of the equipment, so you're going to have logs for that. If you bid out any work, any materials, anything like that, you want to make sure that you're documenting all your purchasing and procurement methodology. And now the cost categories have a little variations amongst them, So you want to make sure that each cost category that you're familiar with any variations or additional information that you might need. Next slide, please. So what is eligible? There are categories A through G. As a generalized statement, you typically see presidential declarations with the categories of A and B. But based on the magnitude of the disaster, the cost of damages, the preliminary damage assessments that are being done locally and submitted to FEMA, that could expand to categories C through G. So A and B, debris removal and emergency protective measures, this is really where you're going to see equipment logs, you're going to see timesheets, job descriptions, all of the personnel that is being used or contracted out in debris removal. Emergency protective measures could be your emergency services department, whether it's emergency management, fire, police, engineering, if you use engineering or public works to deploy, that would be their work. And that's where you're going to see a lion's share of the timekeeping, contract documentation, equipment usage logs, things like that. And in some cases, if you're a small applicant, you may have contracted it out. So you would see the contracts themselves and all of the invoices. You want to make sure that you have a clear line of sight that the invoices tie back to the contract. Permanent work, restorations of roads, water control, buildings, utilities, parks and rec, things like that. More of the infrastructure categories. This is where you would see estimates by an engineer. Maybe you have a cost estimating system. Perhaps you procure for engineering or architecture services. Then you would, of course, the thought being that eventually you would proceed with the repairs and mitigation of this work. Larger applicants may have city departments, smaller may need to procure it out. This is where you also, again, contracts, procurement, you want to document that you followed all of those things with the permanent work. Next slide, please. So local policies, you've got to take into consideration not only the federal disaster grant rules and policies, but also bake in your own local written policies as well. And you must have local written policies in your jurisdiction that you are adhering to as part of the documentation and the substantiation of the cost that you're requesting to be reimbursed in the PA program. So you want to have policies around employee pay under normal situation, blue sky type situation. You want to have employee pay policies under if a disaster is declared under an emergency situation. Even if the presidential declaration has not occurred yet, you want to have a policy locally. What is the policy when you have a hazard occurring? Is it the mayor declaring it, the governor? You want to have a policy in place of what activates that and what levels are activated, not only at a presidentially declared, but even in a more localized or smaller situation. You want to have policies about how an employee is paid under this emergency situation. You want to have purchasing and procurement policies and procedures under normal situations. A good best practice of that is to centralize that. There's many variations I've seen. Generalized statement that usually resides in finance or purchasing department or a city manager's department, county manager. Then you also want to have purchasing and procurement policy procedures locally in the event of an emergency situation. So you want to have a definition of what kicks an emergency situation, and thus then it would take an employee policy pay under normal situation and a purchasing and procurement under a normal situation, and then it begins to activate the changes to the other two, which is pay under emergency and procurement under emergency. So a good thing to consider is job descriptions should have, circumstance by which now you're under emergency situation. You should have outlined who is it who is going to declare the emergency locally, and also be familiar with your current procurement purchasing and then contemplate what that should look like under emergency situations. Also keep in mind local county ordinances, local state laws, things like that. So you want to make sure locally you've addressed it, because as I spoke about earlier, as you document and submit things to PA, FEMA wants to see that you've got a framework in place for these things. Next slide, please. So a pay policy, it's a written policy, you as the applicant organization, what you will pay to your employees. It is the minimum pay, any incentives, any benefits, vacation, health insurance, things like that, that make up the gross employee's pay. It should also include work schedule. You should have an HR policy about what is holiday pay, sick leave, vacation pay. So it's a written policy, typically resides in HR as a generalized statement, just the criteria by which you're going to compensate the employees that work for you. Next, please.
Hi, Sherry, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Maria, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you clear. Can you hear me? Sorry, folks, we're just having some technical difficulties. Just bear with us for one moment, please.
Okay. Maria, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Can you hear me?
I'm so sorry. We are
Okay.
having really bad storms here in West Virginia, and I've lost my internet for a minute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're good.
Okay. So sorry for that, everyone. Okay, so emergency pay policy reclassification. To change the responsibilities for salary personnel, you need to allow for reclassification to hourly. This enables overtime pay and potentially other benefits who are normally salaried. So if a person is normally salaried, make sure that you put provisions in the pay policy for reclassification to hourly. Next, please. There are limitations on emergency pay policy. You can't include a contingency clause that it's subject to federal funding. You've got to apply it uniformly, regardless if it's presidential or not. You've got to have equality there in the pay policy. You can't use any discretionary criteria. Again, it has to be equally applied, and all the costs should be reasonable and equitable for the kinds of work that being performed. So depending on the kind of work, there may be a different pay rate or things like that. All jobs and all responsibilities not being equal. So there are limitations to what you can put in your pay policy. Next slide, please. And as I said, the procurement policy, you want to make sure you have you most likely have or should have a local procurement policy that may be more stringent, but all FEMA grant programs are subject to federal procurement standards. There is the Catalog of Federal Register, 2 CFR 200. Catalog of Federal Register is the how of federal laws, and the section which pertains to the rules for federal procurement are at 2 CFR 200, 317 to 327. It requires local jurisdictions to have or recipients of federal funds to have a written procurement policy You've got to comply with your local and state federal policies as well. And when the policies conflict, you always want to use the most stringent of the policies. Next, please. So now on to contracts with FEMA. FEMA encourages those applying for disaster grant assistance to award pre-positioned contracts or advance before. You want to make sure that you're doing all your preparation and preparedness and things like that during blue sky, because, as we know, disasters happen, within a day or two, or hours, within hours. And you want to make sure that you're in a good position if you need to deploy and respond to the incident. So when you use pre-positioned contracts in blue sky, you have time to be deliberate about your procurement process. You're not rushing things, you're following the process and procedure. And then you also know too, like you would have contractors on call already, it's already in place, and then you can deploy them very quickly as the incident is occurring. And then immediately after the pass of, let's say, a hurricane, you can deploy those resources. So pre-positioned contracts, generalized, some places have quite a few pre-positioned, maybe just a few. It depends on how you're going to staff to address disasters. But it is always a good idea to look locally at where you are and see what resources you have available and what the gaps are, so then you can anticipate what kinds of pre-positioned pre-positioned contracts you need, so that you can have those resources as well, whether it be debris removal, whether it be sheltering, management of sheltering, food distribution, water supplies. If you need supplies in place to make repairs to roads, cut down trees, things like that. So it's always a good idea to look at the resources that you have currently in blue sky and where you think your gaps are with your workforce or nonprofits or things like that in your area. And then go ahead and take your time, follow the procurement rules locally and federally, and then get your contracts in place. And then that's one, you don't need to worry about that. You can deploy and respond very quickly. Next, please. So the contracts are eligible as long as they are awarded according to the federal regulations, which is 2 CFR 200, and the contract scope of work encompasses, it's very tight, and it encompasses the type of work they'll be doing and how much work they will be doing. There are three kinds of contracts. There is a fixed price, one price for what the scope of work does, regardless of what the actual cost. That doesn't mean that they couldn't submit change orders, but it's just one base cost to all of the work that's in your scope. There's also cost reimbursement, and it provides the contractor for any reimbursable costs that are reasonable and allocable and allowable with a fee. And then there are time and materials, which is the actual cost of materials and labor charged. The labor is charged at a fixed rate, and then you would actually pay for the materials. And it reflects the wages, expenses, and things like that, and the profit, and it is subject to a not to exceed cap. Next, please. So next topic, direct mutual aid. Direct mutual aid is a jurisdiction who is responding for the request of mutual aid is the providing entity. So mutual aid agreements between two jurisdictions, and defined in the mutual aid agreement is the jurisdiction who is requesting assistance. And then there is the receiving entity, who is the jurisdiction who is requesting it. Only the requesting entity is the only one that can request reimbursement of funds. So you need to keep that in mind. Also, on the topic of mutual aid, again, look at your needs in your communities. And if you don't have mutual aid agreements in place, I would be looking at that to see whether or not that's something that you do need to do. Typically, jurisdictions do have mutual aids because, as we know, emergency services, disasters, hazards. They don't know geographic boundaries. A lot of times we see counties and cities have mutual aid agreements based on emergency response times and things like that in blue sky. But just keep in mind that the requesting entity is the only one who can request the reimbursement of funds through the PA program. Next, please. So things that you want to include in the agreement, you want to definitely define key terms used in the agreement. So everyone is using this common language when they are speaking about who is doing what, who is requesting what. You want to define the roles and responsibilities of who is, again, who is providing, who is requesting, who will do what. You want to have a procedure in place for how you request assistance and how you provide it. And then you want to make sure that you put procedures, authorities, and rules for payment and reimbursement and the allocation of costs. So it is a legal agreement. You want to make sure that everyone is using the same terminology. Everybody knows who's doing what, how they're going to request it. And you want to make sure that a lot of the rules that I'm talking about today are clear in that agreement. So everyone is on the same page and know the rules of engagement in order to be quick on the deployment to the response in a disaster situation. Next, please. So we're going to segue into HUD Community Development Disaster Recovery, CDBG-DR, Community Development Disaster Recovery, DR. And we're going to talk about federal registers, action plans, policy procedures, subrecipient and contractors, and what their contracts should include, and then briefly touch on 2 CFR 200. FEMA they have guides and things like that with all of their programs, which steps you through all of the things that I previously discussed in the webinar. For community development block grant disaster recovery and HUD, their approach to it is different. They still have rules. You still need a document, things like that. But how you proceed with HUD is a bit different. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So next slide, please. As I mentioned before, Community Development Block Grant DR, CDBG DR, is not budgeted every single year. When there are disasters, presidentially declared disasters, there is a moment where Congress would go in and they specifically appropriate CDBG DR funds for disasters. After that is done, HUD will announce the allocations and they will publish a notice in the Federal Register. So again, the Federal Register is how individuals would actually apply the laws around the appropriation. Through that Federal Register notice, there are rules that must be followed in order to make application for the award of the CDBG DR funds. Once the funds are awarded, once the notice is published, then the state and local governments begin a process to submit an action plan and all of the documentation in order to receive the money. Once that's approved, then the state and local governments begin administering it directly and dispersing the funds to subrecipients or subgrantees. So the state and local governments are the grantee and they manage the funds directly and or they distribute them to subrecipients or subgrantees. Next slide, please. So to show you the passage of time, once the Federal Register is issued, there are time requirements in it to submit an action plan, which is HUD's word for documenting and making application for Congress's appropriation of the money. So it starts with the disaster, the Federal Register is published, and then you submit the action plan to HUD. You begin that process and HUD approves the action plan. You also would be submitting financial certifications to Housing and Urban Development. You would submit those, and you can see the timing of all of this as this is occurring. Once all of that is submitted to HUD and approved, you then would begin developing policies and procedures. So just think of the CDBG-DR money is specific to the appropriation, and there is required documents to demonstrate the capacity needed to manage the funds. And you're also documenting that you have policy procedures and in place that will be your guardrails as you distribute the money. So the development of the policy procedures then is occurring after the grant agreement. That's what is allowable. I would highly encourage you to develop them before or while you are doing your action plan so that you're ready that when HUD releases the money, you have them in place. Next slide, please. Things to consider when you're developing an action plan. There are Federal Register requirements in the action plan, such as defining the programs that you will use the money for, how you will distribute those monies, how you will let out an application, whether it be individuals and building them new houses, whether or not it's applications to developers to do multifamily. So there are certain requirements in the register that you have to put, and a big one of those is what are the programs that you're going to be running with the action plan. Now, the policies and procedures that you will be writing and developing, they actually flow up into the action plan. They don't live in the action plan because every time you change an action plan, there are parameters around if changes are made to an action plan, you actually have to do a substantial amendment. You have to post it for public comment. So you don't want your action plan to be too restrictive if you need to pivot and change for, things that you learn along the way or programmatic changes you want to make. But think of it like you've got the Federal Register, which outlines the time that you have to submit an action plan and the requirements of it. And then from the action plan, you would write policies and procedures under it of the how. So that again is the how of you are actually implementing what you've outlined in the action plan, and the action plan or the umbrella, the overall rules of the Federal Register. HUD will monitor to the Federal Register, but they also will monitor your policies and procedures. So when they come in and they're monitoring, let's say, a single family new construction housing, they'll make sure that all of the rules that are in the Federal Register, example being that you have to benefit low to moderate income persons, they will make sure that those rules at the Federal Register level have been implemented in your programs, but they also will look at and monitor your policies and procedures. So if there are 10 steps to develop, if there are 10 steps to delivering a program, such as single family new construction, they actually will make sure that you followed all of the 10 steps in order to deliver the program of single family new construction. When writing policies and procedures and an action plan, you want to use simple language. You don't want to overly use federal acronym type language, because the action plan not only does it serve as an application to housing and urban development in order to demonstrate that you follow the rules, you've developed programs, you've allowed for public participation, but in order to receive the CDBG-DR allocation. But the action plan also is a document to inform the people that live in your community. We've got all this money. This is how we intend to use it in order to provide long-term recovery to our communities. So you want to make sure that it's language that's accessible and understandable by the people that you're serving in your community. Next slide, please. So the action plan is the first thing that is submitted to HUD, and shortly thereafter, certifications are also submitted to HUD. And the certifications, the implementation plan, if you will, these are the how you are actually going to deliver what you say in your action plan programmatically. And it is demonstrating that you have the capacity, both the financial capacity, the staff capacity, and also policies and procedures in place to process and be adequate in proper grants management. So certifications of financial controls and procurement, they start after the action plan is submitted, and HUD will review those. And this is where you're going to see policy, procedures, contract rules, all of the things that we talked about FEMA, this is where the submission is of how you're going to manage all of those so that you make sure you're adhering to the federal rules of HUD. Next slide, please. So inclusions in the certification, you've got to have, you have to certify that you have financial management controls. So when managing federal money, you don't keep the money in your account, it's in the treasury. You would be drawing down the financial, you would be doing the drawdowns to it and paying contractors or city labor or whichever program you're going to do. You want to make sure that you have financial management control, that you have a clear trackable system that when the money is drawn and then you make expenditures that you can track exactly what that was paid for. And you want to make sure that all of the rules of procurement, all the labor laws, all of the applicable laws have been followed before payment was issued. You also have to include procedures for procurement. You have to include procedures for fraud, waste, and abuse, which can be pervasive when managing federal funds. You have to make sure that in all of the Stafford Acts, duplication of benefits is applicable. So you want to make sure that you're not duplicating benefits that a project received from FEMA, and you're then going to use DR money for the same purpose in the same project. You're not allowed to double dip like that. That's duplication of benefits. All the federal agencies want you to spend the money on time. There are time restrictions on all of the money about when you have to spend it by. So you've got to have policies and procedures in place for timely expenditure. You're developing programs, but you want the policies and procedures to allow for adhering to federal law, but as well, you want to also get the money out the door and most importantly, help people recover and put them back into homes and, of course, fix your infrastructure and things to get you back into more of the blue sky mode where people have been recovered from these disasters. And this is all rolled up into this capacity assessment in the certificate inclusions. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up on that, base your action plan on your policies or base your policies on your action plan. You always want to base your policies on your action plan. The Federal Register is the umbrella. Under that is the action plan. The Federal Register being the overarching federal rules. The action plan is the program design and also how you will make the funds available to your community. And then the policies and procedures are the how you will implement your action plan. You don't want to put your policies in your action plan. You want to keep them separate. And you want to make sure that you do have policies. HUD will look at them. You want to make sure that you're policy driven. I'm sure, as you all know, that there will be several people dedicated to all of your efforts with your CDBG DR money. And policy driven programs, it informs all team members. It lets them know what they're responsible for, what to expect from other team members. It also allows for handoffs amongst different disciplines, like let's say an engineer to a project manager, to a program manager, to a financial person. So by being policy driven, you also don't drop the ball on that, and you can speed up the timely expenditure of your funding and get folks recovered long term. Now, what kind of policies do you need for the DR program? There are policies outlined that are required in the Federal Register. Next slide, please. So you've got to have framework policies. You have to have policies that outline the Federal Register requirements. So if the Federal Register requirement is CDBG DR primarily is to benefit low to moderate income persons, you need to put that in programs such as single family homes. We will benefit individuals, families that are 80% or below median income, which is the definition of low to moderate income persons. If there's a Federal Register requirement that allows you to do certain kinds of activities, then you want to make sure you design programs for only those eligible activities. The next set of framework policy procedures are federal cross-cutting requirements, and it's called cross-cutting because these apply to all federal agencies in the United States. This is where you're going to have policies and procedures for environmental review. So if you're using $1 federal money, you need to have an environmental review. That's NEPA. That is the National Environmental Protection Act. And that requires anytime federal money is used that you have to do an environmental review. If you are, of course, we're dealing with people and they have been displaced, or they could possibly be displaced if you're doing projects. So the Uniform Relocation Act, that's the URA. That is also, you need a policy procedure for that. If you are doing construction projects over $2,000, infrastructure construction projects, you are required to pay Davis-Bacon wage rates, prevailing wage rates. So you're going to want to have a policy procedure around how you do construction, and you're going to want to have requirements that not only if you hire contractors, they pay Davis-Bacon, but you're going to want to have policy procedures about how you're checking to ensure they are paying Davis-Bacon wage rates. And of course, 2 CFR 200, that is the crosscut, which is applicable around contracts, administration, procurement, financial and internal controls, and audit. You're going to want to have all of these framework policies. You're going to want to have in these policies any of your support functions. So if you have audit, finance, or compliance, they need to be at the table when you're designing all of your requirements. And you definitely are required to have a duplication of benefit and a fraud, waste, and abuse policy procedure to ensure that you do not violate the duplication of rules in the Stafford Act. And you also want to put guardrails in so that fraud, waste, and abuse can be detected and reported. And the second level of policies and procedures that you're going to need to have would be any activities you do. And when I say activity, it's interchangeable with program or eligible activity. And this is if you choose in your CDBG-DR after public hearings and input and things like that, let's say you decide to have single family new construction or an infrastructure program, or let's say you have economic development. Any programs that you decide to put in the action plan, you will need to have policies and procedures for those programs. So once again, you know, your team knows how to do the handoffs and interact. And then also, if you are doing, let's say, multifamily and you're bringing in a private sector developer, they will understand what the rules are, the policies, procedures, the how, and how they're supposed to follow it so that they're meeting the requirements. And, you know, there's no dropping the baton as you're trying to timely get the funding spent to get folks back in their home. And then you're also going to want to have policies, procedures. So in the event you have community development block grant funds and you decide to award those to subrecipients, if you decide to have a program where you're going to let out applications and have subrecipients apply, like an example of that is state programs typically will have an infrastructure program where they let all of the designated eligible areas per the presidential disaster make application for, let's say, an infrastructure project. You're going to want to have programmatic policy procedures for those subrecipients, because you as the grantee, when you are awarding money to a subrecipient or a subgrantee, then the responsibility of the rules that are on you transfer to the subrecipient. So you've got to have policies and procedures so the subrecipients also follow the rules, and this ensures compliance. You know, the policy procedures up to you as the grantee, and then of course up to HUD. Next, please. So 2 CFR 200, this is very high level. 2 CFR 200, it defines subrecipients. Subrecipients make programmatic decisions. They have to follow requirements, and they do the, you know, they're out for the public good. And also in 2 CFR 200 with respect to CDBG-DR, there are requirements for specific things that need to be in the agreement. And you always have to include in a subrecipient agreement scope, budget, timeline, any payment terms, if damages are done or delays are done, what are the allowances for that. And you want to put a go, no go determination in there, because again, CDBG-DR, you have to spend in 6 years. If for some reason the subrecipient is not succeeding, you need to make decisions so you can claw back the money and then perhaps use it for another program. Next, please. There's also in 2 CFR 200, 327 definition of contractors. They provide goods and services. they are not responsible for requirements to the feds. You, as the grantee, are that responsible entity. But in 339 and 340, there are requirements in 2 CFR 200 for what has to be in a contract with a contractor. And they are termination clause, they are equal opportunity, Davis-Bacon, all of the federal labor laws, safety standard acts, debar and suspension. If any contractor is debarred or suspended, which you check that by the SAMS.gov website, you are not allowed to hire them or pay them federal money. There are also anti-lobbying and other provisions that are required that you must put in the contract. Doesn't mean you can't add stuff because you want to for your local and state county laws, but these are the minimum requirement. There's also requirements in the 2 CFR 200 that if they do not comply or you need to terminate them, you have to put that language in. Next, please. So procurement, I've talked a lot about procurement. We could spend a lot of time on procurement. We do teach this at SBP. We do a whole course actually on 2 CFR 200 and train to this, but very high level. Currently, the thresholds for procurement are micro. If it's under 50,000, you don't have to get quotes or advertisement. However, if it's $10,001 to 50, you've got to do a self-annual certification that you have policies, procedures in place, that you have a process in place when you hire or purchase supplies under this. You have to maintain that and you will be monitored on that. So keep that in mind. Small purchases are 50,000 to $249.99, and sealed bids are $250 and over. You can do sole source. However, there is a lot of documentation that you need in place for if you do a single source, and it's emergency, and there's just not a lot of competition out there. It's very difficult to do that. Next slide, please. So 2 CFR 200 speaks to cost and price analysis. And I spoke earlier with respect when we were talking about FEMA, but it is also required with housing and urban development that when you are submitting reimbursement for FEMA, when you are going to be monitored by HUD for CDBG-DR, you need to make sure that your cost is reasonable. And the reasonableness cost is an analysis. And the analysis is the evaluation of the elements that make up what it is that the bid has been submitted. And you are also looking at price and price comparisons like a sealed bid. You need to do this, and the best way to do this is to have an independent engineering report. You can have cost estimation. If you're doing acquisition, you can do an appraisal. So you have to substantiate whatever you are submitting. You have to have independent analysis of why it costs that. If you have in-house engineering, you can use your in-house engineering to do that as an example. Next, please.
That concludes our
And that
webinar for
wraps up.
today. Yes, thank you, Sherry, so much. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box. However, I have created a link and QR code for any follow-up questions you may have after the webinar. Please feel free to submit your questions there, and a member of the advice team will respond. As a reminder, please join us for our next webinar in July. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Don't miss the disaster housing course in July and the disaster recovery leader practitioner course. If you have any questions with any of these two courses, please feel free to contact me. There is limiting availability, so to secure your seat rapidly, please make sure that you register today. Again, any questions, just please reach out to me. If you're interested in learning more about SBP advice offering, please contact us at advise@sbpusa.org. Please take a moment to visit our SBP's Resource Hub page. Don't forget to follow us on social media. And again, thank you for joining us today. We'll send out the slide deck shortly, so keep an eye on your inbox, also your spam folder. We hope to see you again at future webinars or in person at one of our courses. On behalf of SBP and the Walmart Foundation, thank you and have a great rest of your day.